15 of the best side deck cards that will help you take advantage of this new format. What's up YouTube, Dal here from Zephyr War Games, and today I'm going to take you through 15 of the best, plus some additional cards as well, of side deck cards that you will need for this format. Now the format is still settling when we've got the new introductions of stuff like sprites and telements, but a lot of people are still unsure of exactly how you combat those particular decks, and the decks that are still floating around in the meta, because keep in mind our decks are different from the OCG lineup. So, I'm going to take you through 15 of the best, in my opinion, that you should be looking at, you should be considering to be putting into your side decks, depending on what deck you are playing, in order to give you as much advantage as possible of winning games 2 and 3 if needed, and taking that all-important victory at locals or higher level events. With all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. So, let's start off with the first one. Now, this one is pretty much a card that goes into all of my side decks, and that is Evenly Matched. Now, Evenly Matched still has such a great matchup against everything else. The issue with it is that it does need to sometimes combo off of another card. Now, what I mean by that is, Evenly Matched is a card that you're not really going to main unless you are building your deck specifically to go second, but it is a card that needs to be able to go through multiple negates. Now, what I mean by that is the standard end board is ending on something like a Totally Awesome for at least one negate, if not two, by the time they bring it back. If you're using sprites, you might even have Carrot set up as well to negate it on top of that. So the card you're going to need to combo with this is another card on the list, and that is Dark Ruler No More. Now, obviously, the two of those together is absolutely devastating unless your opponent is playing Solemn Judgment, which again is a card that is probably going to be more commonly put into the side deck rather than the main deck to kind of go from there. With Evenly Matched, yes, you do leave your opponent with at least one card left. However, it blows out their entire board. It doesn't send them to the graveyards, meaning that it will not trigger the Telement effects as well. And it means that all of the resources they had built on the board are completely gone. When you look at sprites, their end board can be anything from 5 to 6 monsters with maybe 1 or 2 back row sets. So being able to absolutely wipe their board out by going Dark Ruler evenly is incredibly powerful. In regards to Dark Ruler No More, as we are moving on to that one, this is a card that I feel a lot of people are actually main decking, and they're taking that risk of, okay, if I go first, it doesn't matter that it's a dead card, as long as I don't open up multiples, I'll still be able to break my opponent's board if they break mine, and kind of being able to work around it that way. It's also something you could consider as a crossout designator, but the way I see it is crossout is probably a card you're going to either main or not bother, and I'll talk about some of those a little bit later on as well. So Dark Ruler will be second on the list as well. There's no particular order of these, I'm just working through these, but the ones I will start off with will probably be the more commonly used ones in the side deck. So obviously number 1 was Evenly Matched, number 2 of course was Dark Ruler No More. Moving on to number 3, we're looking at potential ways that can again combo off of Evenly Matched. You kind of need to break boards, you need to get rid of people's negates, and with many decks now putting at least 2 if not 3 monsters on the board as a staple end board, a lot of people are actually looking at Lava Golems and Ra Sphere modes. You can of course include Kaijus in this as well, and it all becomes down to what deck you are playing. Some decks do not need their normal summon. When you look at stuff like Exo Sisters, they can get away with the Ra Sphere mode, because that will then allow you to pick off the board and still activate the Martha, because it just isn't a special summon, it's a tribute summon that uses up your normal summon. Lava Golem is a special summon that does not allow you to normal summon. So keep that in mind as well. It's not a normal summon as a tribute, so it doesn't mean that you can still play Martha under that effect as well. It's also very good for sprites as well, because they do play a lot of extenders in the form of Starter and Emergency Teleport that they can play the game without even needing to use their normal summon. So they do get the ability to either go Lava Golem or they can go for Ra Sphere mode. Now, in my opinion, if you have the ability to go for Lava Golem, that is the better one to go for the pure fact that it only gets rid of 2 monsters, and the one that is consistently putting out 3 monsters is probably going to be more sprites than the Telements, but it does happen, so keep that in mind. Off the back of that, when you look at the Kaijus as well, sometimes the Kaijus aren't enough to deal with a board. So you look at the sprite board, yes, you can Kaiju over a Totally Awesome, but unless they fill up, like if your opponent clears off another zone or has another zone free, they can just use Elf to bring it back. So it's one of them situations that it's only going to be good if your opponent has an entirely full board, and if they have entirely full board, you can't get rid of Elf. So it's like you need to be able to negate the Elf, and get rid of the Toad in order to continue to make your plays. So definitely board breakers in the form of Kaijus, Wrath Sphere Mode, Lava Golems are always going to be useful. And like I said, it comes down to what deck you are playing. If your deck needs a normal summon because you're playing a rogue deck, then you're going to be looking more at Kaijus. If your deck does not require a normal summon and does not lock you out of a specific form of special summoning, then you go for Lava Golem. If your deck says, I do not need my normal summon, but I play a card like Martha that says you can only special summon a particular type of card this turn, then you're going to need to go for Wrath Sphere Mode. Carrying on down through the list, we will be looking at stuff like Silent Graveyard. Now, Silent Graveyard is actually very, very specific because it's not the greatest against splites. It will turn off their Ronin Toadium, which means it will make it a little bit more difficult for them to get to Totally Awesome. However, there are ways around it, and a lot of people are playing stuff like Splite Elf to bring back the Swap Frog, send another card, and then you just get a Swap Frog off of the Gigantic, and then by overlaying those two, they still got the Totally Awesome. The Silent Graveyard is a very specific matchup for the Telemans. Telemans are actually very, very tricky to deal with because they can play both during your turn and your opponent's turn. Stuff like a D-Barret is not always the best thing. Unless you've opened up two and you've been able to set one, turn off it and then during their turn, and then do it during your turn, it's not the greatest way of play because that will really, really slow you down, really, really hurt you, and they'll still be able to play either turn. So stuff like Silent Graveyard is being highly considered for the deck to kind of face it. It's not the best, but it is at £1 right now online, definitely worth picking up in my opinion. So it's a card that lets you discard a card, so if your deck wants to discard cards or gets additional benefits from discarding a card, it will then be another form of benefit towards your deck. Carrying swiftly down, we'll go into Cosmic Cyclone, Twin Twisters, General Back Row Hate. Now you can put Lightning Storm under this one, but I'm going to couple this with Harpy's Feather Duster, Red Reboot, Raigeki, Lightning Storm, Dark Hole. So we're going to put these all together in like one big batch. So with the Cosmic and with the Twin Twisters, what makes them better is if people are playing floodgates like Anti-Spell, Fragrance, Gozen, Rivalry, anything like that, you've got the ability to chain to them so they never actually set on the board and get good to go. You clear them off straight away. Obviously, Twin Twisters is going to be more beneficial for a deck that wants to discard cards, and Cosmic Cyclone is going to be a little bit dangerous the closer you get to time, so it's something that you really need to manage at the right periods, and you want to make sure that when you're activating something like Cosmic, you're leading to game that turn, or not allowing your opponent to come back into the fray. Obviously, the issue with Twin Twisters and Cosmic Cyclone is they're only going to hit 1 or 2 cards, and you still need to consider that in the TCG we do still have a very huge range of control decks. When you look at Eldritch Control or Eldritch Branded, anything like that is still incredibly powerful. So Twin Twister might be less effective against it, but you do need to have some form of back row removal. I feel Cosmic is the safest because it can get away through those rogue matchups, but then with the rogue matchups they are playing multiple back row. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I always advise that that people have a form of back row hate in their either main deck or extra deck. You do need to be able to out stuff like Mystic Mine, you do need to be able to out stuff like Gozens, like Anti-Spells, any particular type of floodgates that will stop you playing the game. When you look at stuff like Red Reboot, Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, Raigekis, because they are all counter trap in Red Reboot's form, but normal spells, an anti-spell during the standby phase will really, really wreck you, and you're then not able to play those cards. You'll have to set them and wait an entire turn, and by that time you'll probably either been OTK'd or your opponent's been able to bounce those cards back to the hand or destroy them, so you're not going to get the maximum use out of them as you see fit. Also keep in mind as well that with stuff like Raigekis, Lightning Storms, general board wipes, your opponent will probably attempt to negate them, so it's another one of them ones where you need to combo it off with something like Dark Ruler No More, and if you're going to do something like that, you'd probably rather do that with an evenly matched than anything else. Now obviously a Dark Ruler Lightning Storm can be just as damaging, but keep in mind as well that there are particular cards such as the Telements and of course the Toads as well that will gain additional effects when they're sent to the graveyard, so they'll be able to recycle materials or they'll be able to just create new fusion monsters. So that's one thing to keep in mind about Dark Ruler No More, is that it's not the best card against Telements because they have a hand trap that will attempt to try and make them fusion summon, and then of course they have all their back row as well. So again, it's a combo of the two that you need to be able to go Dark Ruler, board clear, go. Carrying on, we'll look at the floodgates as well. So the floodgates come down to very deck specific. I think the most powerful floodgate right now, which is as easily put into decks as anything else, is Anti-Spell. Now Anti-Spell can be very, very powerful. Now there are decks that do not rely on spells as heavy. So you look at Splites, they could, if they wanted to, cut down their reliance on some of their spells Plus, when an anti-spell is flipped against them, they can activate their quick plays, which is really, really important. If you flip anti-spell against something like Telements, they will lose their poly spells, they will lose their field spell. It does make it a lot more difficult for them to build and play. Against Exo Sisters, their particular spell in packs requires you to be in the main phase, so if you flip that early, their opponent will not be able to chain. It also gives you protection against stuff like Dark Rule and No More. So if you're playing sprites and you know your board gets broken incredibly easily with Dark Rule and No More, a very easy anti-spell can pretty much win you the game from that point on. Keep in mind that a lot of people are dropping Forbidden Droplets for the pure fact that Dark Rule No More gives them that ability to turn off the entire board. Now, particular stuff like Dragon Link will still main the Forbidden Droplet for the pure fact that they get additional advantage by sending stuff to the graveyard. So stuff to keep in mind, depending on what your local environment is, predicting what you're going to be facing up against Euros or regionals or anything like that, you need to really understand the meta that is going around. And like I said, at the moment, the majority is going to be tiers and sprites, and then you're going to get the rogue decks that are still filtered on from the past format. Carrying on, we're going to look at a Pointer of the Red Lotus. Now, I've seen this kind of float around. This is probably more an honourable mention than something you must have, but again, it's quite like anti-spell that if you can't play your deck under anti-spell yourself, you're going to activate a Pointer of the Red Lotus during the standby phase or as early as you possibly can to look at your opponent's hand and then try and take one of the cards from them. So you'd be looking to either take a starter so that they're bricked on cards that they're not able to continue to play with, or you're going to be taking out a Dark Rule No More that turns off the entire board, meaning that your board of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 interruptions is going to be protected with everything you need. Carrying swiftly on, we're going to look at stuff like field spells, so Mystic Mine, Zombie World with the Banshee, and of course Necro Valley. Now, these field spells are all incredibly powerful. I feel that the strongest one, of course, is Mystic Mine, and I actually advise people playing this as a way of countering boards. I don't advise using it as a win con because no one likes to sit there going, draw, pass, decked out game. Like, no one enjoys that, not even the player playing it. Like, that's just boring as hell. However, if you are facing a 3-monster board and something like Ashidal Winder, and you activate Mystic Mine, that completely shuts down the tier element matchup because they won't be able to use their graveyard effects, they won't be able to use their hand effects, and they won't be able to use the field effects. That allows you to utilise monsters or decks such as Exo Sisters, where they can rely on one monster, or you can get into a Zeus clear an entire board, and then get to go again. So it's definitely something that can be utilised at its maximum potential, and is very, very powerful in the generic matchups. Like, if you're able to bait out multiple negates, or again, if you're able to go Dark Rule No More and then Mystic Mine, it can really cause a huge amount of issues for your opponent. And it's kind of the same combo with Evenly and Dark Ruler as it is with Mystic Mine. What you are doing is you're trying to turn off a board of 7 interrupts that will require a card of the level of Dark Rule No More in order for you to play the game. So something that I advise to do in order for you to continue to play the game, because no one, again, wants to go 7 interruptions, draw, no, that's no use to me, scoop. Like, you want to be able to compete, and that's where you get the ability to Mystic Mine lock, gain the resources you need, pick apart your opponent's board as and when you need to, and then build your own one in order to compete. When you look at Zombie World is a little bit more specific, but it's going to be more relevant for a branded deck because they'll have the ability to send Banshee very easily and then set up Zombie World. Zombie World does not affect the branded matchup as much. It will affect the Tillman engine of the branded if you choose to build it that way. But the best thing about something like Zombie World is it can really, really hurt a Tillman matchup, and it can hurt a Sprite matchup. Now, the way it hurts a Sprite matchup is because Sprites with Totally Awesome requires you to tribute a Aqua type, which they won't be Aquas, they'll be Zombies, so they would have to send from their hand and not the field, meaning that they cannot loop Totally Awesome. Even if Totally Awesome tributes as cost, which it does, it will still be treated as a zombie in the graveyard and on the field. It will also couple off with Super Poly, but that's a different conversation for a little bit later on. When you look at the Tillemans as well, their most common card of Kick Kalos does require Aqua Monsters. So again, it becomes a little bit more difficult for them to make. Yes, they'll still be able to make their other cards like the Shadow's Winder, like the Millennium Eyes Restrict, everything like that. But it does shut off Kick Kalos and Kaleido Heart, which are pretty much a utility card in the entire deck in order to get everything going. It's not the best, but it is an alternative option should you have easy access to dump the Banshee, or even if you're playing Dragon Link, you can go Riser, dump Banshee, banish it, Zombie World. That's going to be a little bit more quicker and easier for you to access than something like Mystic Mine, and of course, Necro Valley. Now, I think Necro Valley is a great card this format. The biggest issue is Necro Valley hurts both players, so you need to be able to play Necro Valley in a deck that does not rely much on the graveyard. Now, what I mean by that is Necro Valley negates any card effect, so cards can't be banished from the graveyard. So it's a great counter to something like DD Crow. If your deck auto loses to a DD Crow, Splites, Telements, then being able to play something like Necro Valley is amazing. However, in those examples of Splites and Telements, the reason they are not playing these cards is because it does negate effects in the graveyard that changes the type, and it negates effects that move cards from the graveyard to another location. So it's a great counter side for Telements because then they can't use their effects to spin the materials back into the deck, because it always has to use the Telement that has been sent to the graveyard via a card effect in order to do so. It's not as simple as going, cool, send a Telement, spin 2 materials from my hand back into the deck. No, you need to use the material that was sent. So if you mill a Shiren, if you mill a Meryl, if you mill a Hanvis, you need to use those in order to complete the Fusion Summon, and that's why DD Crow is so powerful. So in a deck that does not rely on the graveyard, for example, Exorcisters in a sense can utilize it. However, Exorcisters do want stuff to be banished and moved from the graveyard, so you'd be changing the strategy of that deck. Should you use Necro Valley, but Necro Valley will ultimately shut down the deck and go from there. Obviously, in the Totally Awesome or the Sprite matchup, you can kind of see that it shuts off Elf completely, which is really powerful. It then shuts off the Toad plays, because then it means that they can't get Ronin Toad in to banish a Swap Frog to summon itself back. They can't use Toad to be able to recycle, and they can't use Toad or Elf to bring the Toad back as well. It can be very, very powerful, but it does become down to what deck you are specifically playing. Carrying on as well, we'll then look at something like Nibiru. Now, Nibiru has been a card that a lot of people have considered putting in, putting out. Personally, I don't think it's a card that is that good this format against the 2 main meta decks, because I feel that on a high competitive level, people will be playing around Nibiru in Splites by going to a Gigantic first, which then means your opponent could not special summon, or neither player could special summon monsters of level or rank 2 or higher. Off the top of that as well, you look at Telements, that technically when you Nibiru your opponent, the Telements effects will then start all to trigger, as I believe. Even if they don't, they still have their back row, they still have their front row, so it's not the end of the world if you Nibiru them. So it's kind of a card that I feel is not going to be in the side decks this format, but it's definitely a card you want to keep your eye on, as it might start making its way back if players start getting a little bit lazy and lackadaisical and start going, you know what, I'm not worried about Nibiru, I'm just going to play however I want, and then they will get punished by a Nibiru at the right time. Carrying on, we'll look at Dimensional Barrier. Now, Dimensional Barrier, like I said, you probably need 2 in order to deal with Telements, because again, they can play through both turns. It's not so great against Splites because, yes, it will shut off their XYZ route, but they can still go a Link route if they wanted to. Like, people are playing the Hulk version. You've also got Elf that will be able to recycle stuff as well. You then look at stuff like Exorcisters. Obviously, it's great against them because they are very linear in the sense that they can only really make XYZs. Unless they're going second and they don't use Martha, they'll then be able to go Liner into Celine into Access Code. Dragon Link is not that great against because they can use Synchros, they can use Link monsters, so D-Barrier is not that great. It's going to be good in the Branding matchup because it can hurt them quite a bit, but like I said, that's where the Telements kind of thrive because they can fall back on both sides. Yes, Telements will come down to a luck value, but if you're telling me, right, okay, well, you can have D-Barrier, which may or may not hit, or you can have something like Dark Royal No More, you're probably going to go something that is a bit more guaranteed to hit multiple matchups, especially in this format. We've then got Sanctum and Scythe. Now again, as I've mentioned in all of those examples, so Exorcisters, Dragon Links, even if you look at Punks as well, Sprites, they all need the extra deck. So if you're able to set up Sanctum Scythe plays, then you're going to be in an incredibly good position. Now keeping in mind that you would have already played through game 1, whether you scooped early or whether you won it, if you go first, being able to set a Sanctum and then set up Scythe plays is incredibly powerful. You look at the Sprite Evil Twin version that I showed you guys the other day, that obviously utilised the Scythe lock, and that's something that a lot of decks can't play through. Again, with Telements as well, we will be able to play through your turn. However, they'll only be able to play through your turn with a Havnis. So if they haven't opened up a Havnis, they're not going to be able to make their plays, they're not going to be able to make their mills, they're not going to be able to make their Fusion Summon plays. So it does become very, very difficult in order for them to kind of capitalise on your particular board. Because at the end of the day, even if your opponent Dark Rulers you, you go, doesn't really matter. I've had Sanctum, I've brought Scythe from the deck. The only thing I'm really going to lose to that is if my opponent plays Gamma or Imperm to stop the Scythe, or they Ash the Sanctum. At that point, it would then mean they'd need to go Dark Ruler, you then let them commit a monster to the board so you don't need to worry about Gamma or Imperm, and then you activate the Sanctum. And a lot of people are not expecting Sanctum plays right now, so as long as you've got the space of 4 cards in your side deck, it can be very, very worth it. Plus you get a free 2200 beater on the board, which in the right deck can be used to either link climb higher or extend a little bit further. Then going on down the list, we'll look at stuff like Super Poly. So Super Poly is a questionable card right now because, yes, we got a brand new target in the form of Garura, but it really comes down to the deck specifics. Now, Super Poly against Exo Sisters can be very, very powerful. Super Poly against the Toad matchup can be very, very powerful if they get a little bit greedy and they go for the Dupe Frog attack lock as well. You then look at stuff like the Telemans. Keep in mind that Kaleido Heart cannot be used via card effect. You then try and Super Poly off their monsters, it will trigger them as card effects as well. So it's not the strongest, it's not the greatest, but it is a very powerful board breaker if you have the space in it. So if you were to build like a pure anti-meta deck, and we're going to use the Eldritch deck as the prime example because it's so powerful still, and it can just utilize any particular one card engine in the form of Branded Fusion, Destiny Fusion, anything like that. So Super Poly is a hit and miss card, but it can still be very, very good. And if you're limited in what you have access to, I would highly advise you looking into it. The final ones that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the level manipulation cards going around. So you've got Mischief of the Gnomes, you've got the Band Plays On, and you've got Styrian Dirge. So Styrian Dirge is a continuous that increases or decreases the levels of all monsters on the field. Mischief of the Gnome does it in the hand. And then the Band Plays On, I believe, is field and hand. No, your opponent cannot summon monsters with the same level as the ones they control. So all of those are very, very good. Now, the Band Plays On is a little bit risky because it's continuous, so it can get chained to, it can get stopped, it can get removed. Mischief of the Gnomes is the best one because it utilised in Telemans because they mill it. They've then got the Graveyard effect to banish it as well and the reduce the levels again. They are very, very powerful cards. Obviously, Mischief is only great against Splites, or the level manipulation is mainly good against the Spite matchup. It can be very, very good in the Exosystem matchup because it does turn them into level 3s, and I would be amazed if any one of my opponents that is playing Exosisters is playing rank 3s in order to kind of deal with that. Not to mention that if they've already used Martha, they're locked into Exosisters. However, quite like Telemans, the Exosisters can play during your turn. It just means that you'll need to go battle phase, clear them off before you start moving anything from the graveyards. And now I'm going to do some honourable mentions. So these are cards that I feel that should be in your main deck, and if they're not, they're definitely in your side deck. Or if they're in your side deck at the moment, you definitely need to put them into your main deck. And then we'll talk about a card that was massive last format, and I still think is in the grey area this format. So the cards that should definitely be in your main deck will be DD, Crow, and Ghost Ogre. So when you look at cards like Splites, Gigantic Sprite doesn't detach as cost, so it actually activates its effect on the field, and then if it gets Ghost Ogred, it will get destroyed, and then it will not resolve with effect. So alongside something like Ash Blossom, if you Ash Blossom early, your opponent goes, oh yeah, I'm safe, I'm going to play Gigantic, I'm going to use Gigantic's effect, and you just go Ghost Ogre, it will completely wreck them down. It obviously is very, very damaging against Exosisters. It can be less effective against Tears because if you activate it, they'll then get their graveyard effects. So if they've got the materials to fuse with it, they will do so, and then that will allow them to extend a little bit further. The one card that is incredibly important and powerful this format is, of course, DD Crow. With something like DD Crow, what you get the ability for is you get the ability to turn off or to negate, in theory, the fusion summons coming off of the Telemans, because you get to banish that monster that, like I said at the start, needs to go back into the main deck in order to successfully complete that fusion summon. You can DD Crow the Ronin Toad in, you can also DD Crow the Toad as it's targeted off of Elf in order to bring it back. Keep in mind as well that where Elf points to cannot be targeted via card effects, so that does make Imperm a little bit harder to kind of play around with. The other card that I want to talk about is, of course, just general banishing. Now, you look at stuff like D-Fissure, you look at Macrocosmo, and you look at Shifter. The cards like these are only specific to, or will be specific to decks that do, again, not require in the graveyard. So you look at Flunders, you look at Exosisters. They could main these cards if you want to, they could use these cards if you want to, and it will shut down Splites, it will shut down Telemans, but they are very, very specific. And again, I think it's one that you'll probably main them if you're going to play them, or not bother at all. So the card that I wanted to talk about that was really great the last format, I feel that it could be okay this format, is Droll and Lockbird. Now, the issue with Droll and Lockbird is when you look at Splites, what they're going to be able to do is, if they can activate something like Blue, which adds the monster, you could Droll them there, which means they're not going to get the starter off of the back of Jet. And it means they won't be able to get Carrot, they won't be able to get Orange or anything like that. You can also do it off of Pot of Prosperity, which is a card a lot of people are playing right now. But the issue with that is it doesn't end their turn. Like in the past, when you used to Droll like a punk player, they'd go, right, okay, I'm going to lose so much advantage, it's probably not worth me carrying on. Whereas in this particular format, if you do it against tier monsters, again, unless they've activated Prosperity, unless they've activated Terraforming to get to their field spell, you're not really cutting off as many of the resources as you might expect. Which is why, if a lot of people are questioning, well, why is Droll kind of dropped out of the format? that's one of the reasons why. It's not as impactful or as effective as it once was. However, do not get lazy with it, because I expect that if your opponent does get a little bit lazy with it, it's like, I'm not going to bother about playing around Droll. Droll can seriously hurt them. Obviously, Droll's going to be better against the road matchups as well, which is why a lot of the road decks are coming back into the fray that are like, well, I used to get absolutely neutered by something like Super Poly, I used to get absolutely neutered by Droll Not Bird, and I also got neutered by Token Collector. No, slipped my mind on that one there. So with stuff like that, they're kind of falling out of the meta. So it gives you that little gap in this time where we're waiting for the format to settle, where you can play these road decks and actually do very, very well, because a lot of people aren't expecting or aren't siding for those particular matchups. So this may be the time where you can experiment a little bit more and play around with it. But as I've mentioned through all of these cards that I've listed out for you today, it's a little bit more than 15, but I just wanted to give you as many options and alternative versions of those particular cards. So when I said multiples together, like Mystic Mine, Zombie World, Banshee, and Necro Valley, you're probably going to go for one of those three, because they do pretty much serve the same purpose in what you're trying to do. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative. I hope you found it useful as well. If you do have any questions, please put them in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. And as absolutely always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe so you don't miss out on anything else. Stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.